I noticed that when someone would tell me what to do, I lacked the motivation. I didn't get context. And the message was delivered in a way that the energy didn't feel inviting. Now, I believe in God. And I believe God invites me to be happy, doesn't force me. He doesn't push me. That's a huge difference. I wasn't invited to be happy as a kid that I remember. And I remember when you and I got married, other than worrying if I could even make a living to support you, my biggest concern was I didn't exactly know how to be a dad. I mean, I had the experience of raising my sisters, but I'm a brother, really. What happens if I am totally responsible for that? How would I teach my children, right?
Because you didn't have
an example
of a dad in your life.
Right. And I really didn't have a lot of examples growing up where I emulated or wanted to emulate people that I respected as adults, because they spent most of their time telling me what to do and think instead of asking me what I thought, teaching me a principle, and then inviting me into that arena to grow and to learn.
But still, that was an outside, looking to the outside first.
And so what I started realizing, and I can picture times in my life where I would, like I had this class in high school. It's when I first started reading. It was my senior year in high school. I remember literally living an experience, having a visceral, energy-filled experience by reading a book. And I was studying history. And I was so enraptured in what was going on societally. It was World War II. What was going on with the Germans, what was going on with the Dutch and the Poles. And I could feel viscerally a sense of movement within that. So I realized my imagination was absolutely on fire. Well, remember, you know, from when you first met, I was really trying. I thought I was logical. I thought I was reasonable and rational. I wasn't any of it, but that's my perception of myself. And so I came from a world where I was taught that emotions are weak. And I didn't realize that the power of the imagination, the power of healing from within, was the power to change. That was brand new to me. And I didn't, even then, Sherry, I didn't have words. And so as this journey has continued, you know, as I've developed, you know, what I perceive a work, this willingness to be found has really transformed me. And again, I didn't have those words. I had to learn these words from Kenneth Bailey. But I would like to share a little bit about this idea of willing to be found in the time we have left to actually continue the answer to this question, why should I even try?
Okay. Why should I even try to connect, even though I'm told it's so darn important?
Right. Would you just read this paragraph here, Sherry?
So have you ever met a know-it-all or someone who always has to be right? Now, wouldn't it be fun to say something to them that is so pithy, so remarkable, or so profound that their only response is to plot your demise? Well, this is what happened to Jesus when he addressed the religious bullies of the day, the Pharisees.
So the idea here is I've met many a bully in my life, and I would love to have come up with something that would have been so cool that I could have just slammed them. But that would have never got me anywhere, right? It was the sheer neutrality and righteousness of a man called Jesus that these bullies, they wanted to kill him. So I'm going to set up a story here. And this is a story that I think when I heard the original way of doing it was really profound to me. So one of the challenges that the Pharisees had with Jesus is he didn't follow their immaculate perception of life. They perceived themselves to be perfected. They knew the law. They were brilliant IQ-wise. They had very limited social skills. But they were the bullies of the day because they were the ruling class. It's like politics today. I mean, you just think about what's going on in the United States of America right now. We got bullies on both sides of the scale. And we got people who are breaking the law on both sides of the scale. We have people who, when I look at this, how can I support either side because of the maladaptive behavior and the sheer ruthlessness and anger and the vitriol that is being perpetrated on both sides, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm not trying to take a side. I'm just trying to indicate on the fringes, we've got some cantankerousness. The Pharisees were the fringe. They were the ones doing that. All right. And what they didn't like was that Jesus hung around with sinners. So he says the following to them. And this is traditional first half of life behavior, by the way. So the Pharisees were engaged in shadow work. And he, meaning Jesus, spake this parable unto them, saying to the Pharisees, what man of you having 100 sheep, if he has lost one of them? To an American, what's the big deal? To the Pharisee, they wanted to beat him up. That statement alone got them so enraged. And here's the reason. And Kenneth Bailey teaches this. He says the Pharisees came from a long line of, this is me, of intellectual and spiritual bullies. And then Kenneth Bailey explains, Arabic-speaking scribes struggled with the phraseology of the first line for over 1,000 years. Notice the verbiage. What man of you having 100 sheep, if he has lost one of them? See, an Arabic translator would never say that. He would say, if one of them is lost. Spanish is the same way. I didn't miss the train left, or the train missed me. Mm-hmm. So it's like a teenager in the kitchen. You know, he's doing dishes, but he drops one in the china. Oh, I dropped the dish. But a Pharisee would say, the dish jumped out of my hands. Okay, so that's where we're going with it. In the parable of the lost sheep in Luke 15, this is what he says, and this is why I think it's so profound in healing. When Jesus said, if the shepherd loses a sheep, he leaves the 99 and goes and finds the one. He doesn't leave them alone, which is what I used to think as a kid, because no one told me differently. That makes sense. He just leaves the 99 sheep alone out in the wilderness, and he goes and plays hide and seek with this one lost sheep. That's not what happens at all.
There's this assumption he's the only shepherd.
That's an assumption. He leaves them with under shepherds, so they're in good care. But the sheep know there's a lost sheep. So he says to them, look at guys, Sherry's lost. I'm going to go find Sherry. So I'll be back. And so the shepherd actually knows where Sherry is, because he's wandered these hills and brought his flocks through these hills for decades. Sheep are dumb. They get lost easily, and he knows where to find them. So what he does, and if I'm a parent, by the way, and you're my daughter, and I know you're lost, and I know where you are, I'm going to march up to you. I'm going to grab you. I'm going to bring you back and say, I love you so much. And then I'm going to get mad at you. If you're my son, I might hit you. Then I'm going to restrict you, and I'm going to get so angry. That's an American parental way of doing it, showing their love, right? They get angry and they double punish. That's not what Jesus did. When he gets near the sheep, he stops a way off before the sheep sees him. And he takes his staff, his shepherd's staff, and he pounds it 3 times on a hard surface. And then he coos into the staff, a special sound that only he makes. Sheep, since lambs, have been trained to listen to the master's voice, the still small voice. If that sheep wants to be found, the sheep will bleat. Notice the difference. The shepherd invited the sheep to be found. If the sheep wants to be found, he's going to bleat. And then Kenneth Bailey teaches the cool principle of repentance. Repentance is the willingness or the acceptance to be found. It's really that straightforward. And there are many listeners who probably have a Christian bend who have been in sermons or meetings where the leader calls everybody to repentance, right? Or we've been taught as Christians to proselyte, calling people to repentance. And our interpretation of repentance is to let you know that you're wrong. I'm going to try to get you to agree that I'm right, that you need to be fixed. That's not an invitation. That's agreement seeking. That's in the me pyramid. That's an unsolicited opinion and judgment. I don't believe that has anything to do with principles of any kind of behavior or any kind of religion. You invite people to be found based on principles. All right. What being found means, you're going to come into the light. So Jesus now represents the light. If I'm willing to be found, I'm going to be found by light, or what we call truth. So now we're going to remove religion just for a second. And we're going to say, so if you were to look at my desk right now, my wife has this nice big water bottle, a Contigo. That water bottle is going to represent the light. If I'm in my first half of life and I want to get to second half of life, I'm going to need to learn new tools in order to get there. If I'm in my first half, the closer I get to that light, the easier it is for me to see shadows that reflect off of me. Now, by definition, remember, shadows are false narratives.
Depending on which way you're facing. If you're facing away from the light, you see the shadows.
You can look over your shoulder.
Sure. It's looking backwards.
The shadow will still be there.
Right.
So I'm going to go over shadows real quick. So false narratives. So we've talked about them extensively on the show. So we have, I have no worth. It's my fault. I'm not lovable. I can't have emotional intimacy with people. I don't deserve. I can never be safe. I'm powerless, helpless, and hopeless, and I'm not good enough. All right. So we're going to take a break here and we're going to get ready for the next segment. But this is a summary. If you want to be found, if you want to find happiness, joy, and well-being, if you want to discover who you yourself are, every philosopher from the beginning of time has says to know thyself. If you know yourself, you know God. If you know God, then you know yourself. So in other words, the only way to be found is to get into the light so you can see your shadow or your shadows. Mm-hmm. So I think we better quit there, and then we'll pick this up in the next one.
We're going to resolve what we do with those shadows.
We want to resolve the shadows. How do you see the shadows? How do you recognize the shadows? Mm-hmm. And then how do you and why do you then reach out to people who seemingly don't care about you? So thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate it. Remember, if you're having a rough go, it's perfect. It's exactly what you need right now to come closer to integration, to figure you out, to find your identity. That's your authentic self. Perfect is a mistake that gets a retake, and we look forward to talking to you in the next segment.
Doubt is a broken record that plays inside my head. I try to turn it down, but I can't quite drown it out. I'm tortured every day. These never-ending worries pulling on my sleeve.